Imagine settling into your business class seat, finally ready for a smooth flight. The hum of the engines, the quiet comfort of luxury. It feels like everything you've worked for has brought you here. But then, out of nowhere, a voice cuts through the calm. He doesn't belong here. Heads turn. A man's dignity is questioned, not because of his ticket, not because of his behavior, but because of the color of his skin. In that moment, the cabin becomes a stage for something far bigger than travel, and what happened next left every passenger speechless. Marcus had worked his entire life to reach this moment. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, long nights of study and relentless discipline had finally paid off. He was now one of the youngest flight safety instructors ever contracted by the FBI. His work demanded constant travel, and today's assignment had placed him in the polished comfort of business class. For most passengers, it was just another flight. For Marcus, it was a quiet reminder of how far he had come. The cabin was calm at first. Polished silverware glimmered on trays. Soft lighting illuminated the rows, and the low murmur of passengers created a peaceful rhythm. Marcus sat back, reviewing notes on his tablet, ready to prepare for the upcoming training sessions he'd been asked to conduct, what he casually referred to as flying lessons. Yet beneath the hum of the engines, an unspoken tension was brewing. He noticed subtle glances from a man a few rows ahead, quick, sharp looks, too frequent to be accidental. Marcus brushed them off at first, used to the silent judgments that often followed him in spaces where few faces looked like his. But something about this man's stare carried a weight, an intensity that suggested words were forming, waiting to be unleashed. What Marcus didn't know was that this flight, meant to be routine, would soon turn into a defining story, not just of privilege and prejudice, but of how quickly truth can silence ignorance in the most unexpected way. At first, the glances were easy to ignore. Marcus had been here before. Conference rooms where he was mistaken for the assistant, security checkpoints where he was asked twice for ID while others breezed past. Years of composure had taught him to stay focused on the bigger picture. But, in the close quarters of a business class cabin, silence felt heavier, the scrutiny sharper. The man in seat 3A finally leaned over to the flight attendant, his voice low but laced with irritation. Marcus caught fragments. "Are you sure he belongs here?" "Doesn't look right. Check his ticket." The attendant's polite smile faltered for a second before she reassured him that everything was in order. Still, the whisper had spread. A few nearby passengers exchanged uneasy looks, the kind that say everything without words. Marcus kept his eyes on his tablet, pretending not to notice, but inside he felt that familiar knot tightening in his chest. It wasn't the first time someone questioned his right to be in a space he had earned. Yet here, high above the ground, there was no easy escape, no way to step outside and breathe. Moments later, the man's voice rose louder, cutting through the hum of the engines. "I don't feel safe sitting here with him. I'm telling you, something's not right." This time, the entire cabin turned. Conversations halted. Forks froze mid-air. Marcus felt dozens of eyes pressing against him, not with curiosity, but with silent judgment, waiting to see what he would do. The flight attendant's cheeks flushed as she tried to calm the situation. "Sir, his boarding pass is valid. He's in the correct seat." But the passenger wasn't satisfied. His words carried venom now. "Valid or not, you need to move him. People like that shouldn't be up here. Put him in coach where he belongs." The words stung deeper than the man likely realized, or maybe exactly as he intended. Marcus sat motionless, his breath steady, his mind racing. Years of professionalism told him not to react, not to let anger dictate his actions. But beneath, the calm exterior was a storm he'd fought too many times before, the struggle of being judged not by achievements, not by character, but by skin. Whispers rippled through the rows. Some passengers frowned in disapproval, while others avoided eye contact altogether, unwilling to involve themselves. That silence, Marcus knew, could be just as loud as the insults. Each second felt like an eternity, the tension stretching tighter, with no release. The attendant tried once more, firmer this time. "Sir, please lower your voice. Everyone has the right to sit where they are ticketed." But the man leaned back with a scoff, his arms crossed, a smugness in his expression that suggested he believed he had already won, that his words had cast enough doubt to leave Marcus diminished. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the cabin pressing down on him. He knew the next move wasn't just about defending his dignity. It was about confronting a prejudice so blatant, so public, that silence could no longer be an option. The moment of decision was drawing near, and the truth he carried would soon change everything. The man in 3A wasn't finished. His voice grew louder, his accusations more direct. "If you don't move him, I'll take this to the captain myself. People like him can't be trusted. Not in business class, not anywhere near me." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman shook her head in disbelief. A man shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The flight attendant stood frozen, caught between professionalism and outrage. Marcus, however, remained composed, his stillness in stark contrast to the chaos around him. Then, without raising his voice, without a hint of anger, Marcus reached calmly into his jacket pocket. Every eye followed his hand. For a moment, the air inside the cabin seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation. He pulled out a slim black wallet and held it up, not to the attendant, not to the aggressor, but for the entire cabin to see. The gold lettering caught the cabin lights first, then the emblem, clear, unmistakable, FBI Special Agent. The man in 3A went pale. His smug posture collapsed into stunned silence, his mouth opening and closing with no words to follow. The arrogance that had filled his voice moments before evaporated, replaced by a trembling uncertainty that left him visibly shaken. The cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in silence. Dozens of passengers stared wide-eyed, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling heavily on their shoulders. It wasn't just the badge, it was the unspoken truth it carried. The very man who had been treated as less than human was, in fact, one of the highest symbols of authority and protection. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply lowered the wallet, slid it back into his jacket, and turned his gaze out the window. His silence was louder than any argument could have been. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. The racist passenger slumped in his seat, exposed, not by confrontation, but by truth. And the entire cabin, once complicit in silence, now saw him for what he truly was. The rest of the flight unfolded in heavy silence. No more accusations, no more demands. The man in 3A kept his eyes fixed on the seat in front of him, his earlier bravado now a hollow shell. The flight attendant, her voice steadier than before, asked Marcus softly if he needed anything. He smiled, politely, and shook his head. He had already made his point without saying a word. For the other passengers, the scene refused to fade. What they had witnessed wasn't just a confrontation between two men. It was a mirror held up to society. They had seen how prejudice could strip dignity in an instant, how silence from bystanders could amplify injustice, and how truth, when revealed with calm strength, could disarm ignorance more effectively than rage ever could. Marcus leaned back into his seat, his expression unreadable. He wasn't proud of having to flash his badge. In fact, the thought lingered painfully. What if he hadn't been an FBI agent? Would the flight attendant have defended him as firmly? Would the other passengers have stayed silent still or spoken up? The badge had changed the narrative, but the deeper truth remained. Respect should never require a title, a uniform, or an emblem of authority. When the plane touched down, Marcus gathered his belongings and walked out quietly, leaving behind not just an empty seat, but a lasting lesson for everyone who had been watching. The man who tried to belittle him would likely never forget the humiliation of that day. But perhaps more importantly, the witnesses who sat in silence had a choice to make. Would they remain passive in the face of injustice again, or would they find the courage to speak up next time? And as you reflect on this moment, ask yourself, if you were on that flight, would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood up? If this story touched you, don't just watch, be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.